Hey, how's it going? Dylan here, and welcome to the overview video of Cinematic Lens Flares version 1.0, which is something I've been working on for a little bit of time. And basically, the idea behind it was that the lens flares that are in Unreal Engine are, well, they're extremely old, and from what I understand, they haven't really been changed since around UE4's release. So that's a long time. They, in my opinion, don't really look very good. You can't really customize them at all, very much. And yeah, so I set about. I've been wanting to do this for a few years now. Finally had the time to sit down and do it, based on many sources in terms of the way lens flares work, post processing and such. So this release is a completely post-process material based asset. There's no engine modifications or source code changes needed. It just sits in a normal Unreal Engine post-process material, and so you can chuck it on basically any Unreal project on 5.2 or up. And yeah, we'll go over it in a second. So it has a bunch of different features, so let's jump right in. So I'm here in the Meerkat demo, which everyone probably would recognize. I've made some tweaks to the lighting, so the sun source is much lower in the sky to demonstrate this for us. By default right here, what we've got going is we've got convolution bloom enabled. Now these lens flares are actually designed to work with convolution bloom. That's a question a lot of people have had. The reason being is that I don't really do a bloom pass per se in my lens flares implementation. I might do that in the future, but for now it's designed to mix with convolution bloom to get that kind of standard looking bloom there. So enable convolution bloom or standard bloom, but this looks a lot better with convolution enabled, as does most things. So we've got that enabled there in our post-process volume. If we head down to our post-process materials section, so it'll be closed, you'll be open it. So if we go add here and we go asset reference, we get a selection to add our post-process material. So if we head on over to the content browser, when you install the asset, you'll have a folder called Cinematic Lens Flares here, and inside we've got blueprints, material parameter collections, and materials. So there's really not a lot to it here. If we head into our materials, we can see it's called PP Cinematic Lens Flares, and so let's type that in. So we can see we've got it here. And look at that, we've already got some nice flaring happening here. So once that's been added, what we want to do is head into the blueprints folder, and we'll chuck in our controller blueprint, which is PP Cinematic Lens Flares. So we'll chuck this guy in here. As you can see, some stuff disappeared. So what we've got here, let me just expand this. What we've got here is a bunch of interesting controls for the flares. Now, so what we need, we've got our main section, which is our cinematic lens flares section. So we've got the overall intensity. So if we bump that up, everything gets in more intense. If we bump it down, everything gets more subtle. So that's an easy way to ramp it up based on like your shot exposure or the look you're after. If you want something more subtle or more intense, this is the way to go to increase or decrease everything while keeping your levels, like in relation to each effect, the same. We've also got our blur samples. Now, because there's a bunch of bokeh blur stuff going on for the lens ghosts and the halo effects, and this is our samples here. So we can increase or decrease this, which increasing it increases the quality of the blur, but it does decrease performance, obviously. So that's a bit of a balancing act. If you're going for more of this is designed for rendered cinematics mainly at the moment, like really high-end visual uses, so it's not designed for real-time use, but you can actually use it for real-time use. If we lower it down to really low samples, you will get a okay-ish performance impact. But for rendering, we've got a bit more leeway. It's still very fast compared to other effects like ray tracing and such for rendering out cinematics. Okay, so let's jump into our first section here, which is the lens halo. So what I'll do is I'll actually disable the other effects so we can enable them one by one. So lens halo, if we just, the strength is a bit low here, we'll just ramp this up for the purpose of the video. So our lens halo here looks a bit like this. What we've got here is our, we've got a bunch of settings here, and I'll go through pretty much everything because you know, there's a lot of settings and it's a bit intimidating sometimes. So as you can see with the lens halo, we get these nice kind of glows around the screen. Now it's based on the scene texture. Everything in this implementation is, because it's image based. So what you see on the screen gets used and warped to make this kind of effect. So basically what we've got lens halo strength, obviously, which is what I just changed to exaggerate everything so we can see what it is doing. We've got lens halo blur, which is essentially the blur of the scene texture. So we can actually bring this all the way down to 0, and you can see what's going on here in the core of the implementation. So we're actually kind of applying a fisheye to the image, and then we are bokeh blurring it out it doesn't matter with the outside about low samples, because we get these kind of nice streaks, which you can see just here. Kind of beautiful little, look like lens glints and things like that. So we've got the lens halo fisheye scale, which is the overall scale of the effect. So as you see, if I bring it in, we've got the edges of the effect, and if we enlarge it, then you know, we zoom in on it. Essentially, this is really useful for the type of lens effect you're going for, whether it be more subtle or not. Then we've got the lens halo UV scale, which is the scale of the actual source texture before it gets warped around. This is super useful for kind of blurring out details. If you want really large kind of shapes like this, where we get these really nice chromatic separation going on, you can use this scale to get some really interesting effects. We'll jump into the diffraction shift stuff. Now this stuff is probably the most intimidating part of the whole thing. This gives us these beautiful little chromatic kind of shifting effects. So there's a few different levels. We've got the bokeh diffraction shift. So this is just the general diffraction shift per sample. The lens halo bokeh point diffraction shift. So this is actually per individual sample in the bokeh blur. So if we just ramp this up more so you can actually see what's happening here. You would not usually have it this bright, but for demonstration purposes, if I up the point diffraction shift, you can see the patterns start to change a bit, and essentially we get different kind of color combinations. As you can see, we've got a bit of green there now. Then we've got lens halo diffraction add, which is essentially, this also kind of affects the color shifts in the halo. We get a bit of green and yellow there. This is essentially each sample, we're adding a value to the color shift. We've got lens halo diffraction the multiply, which is a similar effect to the add, but instead it's an overall multiply on the color shift. So as you can see, we can get some really kind of crazy effects going here. Then we've got the lens halo power, which is the overall power. It's just a power applied to the overall effect, so you can kind of, you know, contrast it up like so, or down and have a really faded effect. We've got the lens halo coverage, which is essentially the area that it affects from the edge of the screen. So you can really bring that back, so you're going to get the corners, or you can bring it in to get more ethereal effects. I'll just bring the intensity down a bit more. For these next settings, we've got the lens halo horizontal stretch and vertical stretch. So this, you can actually essentially change the horizontal stretch of the fisheye. So that means you can get more kind of horizontal bars. So you've got kind of less of a fisheye effect, but only in one direction. So you can increase it to get more, or decrease it to get more of the fisheye effect, and increase it to flatten it out. Same with the vertical stretch, but in the other direction, as you can see. And then we've got the halo threshold, which is essentially, if you think about it as it's using the scene color that's been rendered, and the threshold is the threshold of where it actually uses it based on brightness. So if we raise this, you can see we get less and less kind of the subtler effects of the halo, and we're just keeping the brighter parts of the halo there. And then last but not least, in this section we have the lens halo diffraction color, which essentially is the color that gets added per sample to shift the actual, to do the color shift effects. So if we bring this around, it's very subtle. You kind of only see it in the really high effect parts, but it's useful if you want to kind of get a certain look. It's more useful in the lens ghost section, but it does have a slight effect here. We've also got the lens halo tint, which is super useful. We can tint like different colors, which I'm sure is probably the effect that a lot of people will be doing. You know, for anamorphic, you're gonna get a little bit of blue tinge going, etc. Super useful. All right, so let's disable the halo and enable the lens glints. So the glints, as you can see, are your streaks, essentially. Now this section is a bit smaller than the halo section. What we've got here is a few different settings. We've got lens glint type, which is pretty cool. Now there's 7 types in the plugin at the moment. I'm planning to add more, and then later on I'm going to plan to add individual rotations for the glints, so you can really be quite customizable. But for now, I want to keep things simple. So there's a few presets. So at the moment we're on preset 0, which is like this kind of cross effect. Here I'll just ramp up the strength so we can really see the glints. You can see the cross here. So if I change this to 1, we get kind of like a really vertical kind of diagonal cross. We'll get to 2, we'll get just a straight cross. 3 is obviously another kind of squished one, kind of more anamorphic-esque. Then we've got kind of combined ones where we have more than 4 glints. We have 8 of them, essentially. We've got a few of these presets. You've got this one here, the star, and then we've got a kind of squished version here as well for number 6. But yeah, by default it's on 0. That just gives you a little bit more customization as to what the look of the glints you want. I actually quite like the diagonal cross here. We've got lens glint size, which is the overall size of the glints, as you can see. Make them really large, really small. We've got the sample count. Now this obviously also does need samples. If we lower this, you'll see that we'll start to get stepping in the anamorphic glint here, which we'll get to in a sec. This does add to performance, but not as much as the bokeh blur related things. We've got the step size, which you can just leave, but for more customization, if you're seeing a bit of banding in the flares, you can play with this. The lens glint strength, which I was playing with before, get it brighter or dimmer. Now we've got here lens glint flat color, which is a super useful setting. I've been using it quite a bit since I added it. So this will, so by default we get like this kind of diffraction happening, which the settings are just below. But sometimes you just want like a certain colored flare, and for instance, if you had like a pure red light source, you won't really get much diffraction going because it's one color. This lets you set it, if we set it to glint flat color, you see now it's just blue here instead of it, even though it's an orange light source. And you can change that with the glint tint. So we can change the color to purple, we've got the blue, we've got yellow, green, red, etc. So it's really, really handy, especially for the anamorphic glint, which we'll have a look at in a sec. If we turn that off though, we've got the lens glint diffraction color, which is essentially the color that, as it affects the color change. As you can see, this goes from blue to yellow to green here. We can change all of that in the actual glint here. We can kind of change, you can see it's kind of changing the way that the diffraction happens and the colors that you get, rainbow effects and such. Then we've got the anamorphic lens glints, which I'll turn it off and on. As you can see, we get our streak here. And again, we've got a separate size value here, which is also very handy. And we can set that to flat color as well, which is probably the most handy way to use this, to use the diffraction colors on the main flare, main glint, and then a tinted anamorphic flare like you get in a lot of lenses, which the classic is your blue flare there. But again, we can change this. We can change it to like a red one, pink one, green, etc. So super customizable there. And again, we've got the diffraction color, which does the same thing that we looked at for these glints, but for this one, if we have flat color off. Now we've got the lens ghost. So I'll turn off I'll keep the glint on. Actually, let's turn these on to have some nice effects going. And now we've got lens ghosts, which are I'll just move it to a more appropriate angle so we can see them. Alright, so this is a really good one to see them. So you can see them just here, a little bit coming in here. So let's increase our strength to be able to see them. So the cool thing about the lens ghost is probably the coolest looking effect, I mean maybe apart from the streak, is that we have a lot of control here. This is the largest section, so I'll try and go nice and slow. But you've got a few major options here. You've got the offset, which affects the kind of positioning of them, as you can see. You've got the count, so we can lower them or we can raise them. I like to have it on 6, it's a nice number. And obviously raising these does decrease performance because there's more of them to blur. Got the strength there, which we were playing with. Now we've got a bunch of diffraction settings, which are similar to what we looked at before in the Halo. Essentially what this does is so this will kind of change some of the finer details, which you can't really make out at this. So we've got some flare here, as you can see. Let's keep it there for a second so we can see more of the effects. Okie doke. So what we want to do here, as you can see, this kind of, you can see the flare closest to camera. The shifting is kind of changing around a bit, and the colors and things like that. So that's the diffraction add, and then the multiply does a similar thing. It's a bit less of an effect. You've got the lens ghost diffraction shift, which also will shift. You've got the lens flare diffraction shift, which also will shift your colors based on different parameters. You can see some of them are changing color. And then you've got the different levels. So that one's just per flare. Then you've got the bokeh level. So this will change kind of bits and pieces of it. You can see some of the samples are changing color. And then the point, so the individual point samples. So you get some nice kind of shifting going on there. You don't really need to touch these. These are in a nice place by default. Completely understandable if you don't want to jump into those. It's just if you want a more fine-tuned control, if it's like a per shot doesn't quite look the way you want it, then you can kind of play with those. We've got horizontal and vertical stretch here for the bokeh. So what we can do is that we can see we can actually stretch these guys out in a horizontal way or a vertical way. So you can get some really nice effects as they get larger. Like you get all this really nice kind of blurred out detail. Now here we go, some of the more useful kind of overall settings for the ghosts. We've got lens ghost fade power, which essentially, if we lower this, you can see the difference in brightness from each lens ghost gets larger essentially. So you can kind of fade them out, have really subtle, more like only a few sharp, like bright flares, and the rest are quite dim. By default, it's on 1. You can even increase it further. When you increase it, everything gets like kind of more similar brightness per level. So it's kind of quite useful, especially for these larger ones. If you want a really nice kind of, sometimes I like to set it to 2 to get kind of these really nice blown out, blurred out highlights there. And of course, you would lower the strength a little bit to get kind of kind of this effect. Then we've got this scale curve. So this thing here controls essentially as it does its thing for each bokeh ghost. For each ghost, the bokeh blur gets larger, and this just affects the curve of that. So you can see like we're really blurring out the large ones. And this can give you really nice kind of effects as well with all the color shifting. You can obviously increase samples to get rid of the dappling, but sometimes I kind of like this kind of look. It feels pretty nice. Then we've got Ghost Band Diffusion, which is essentially, as you can see, if we increase this, we can get some like banding patterns on them, and that kind of shifts the colors a bit. I'd usually use this kind of sparingly, just a really subtle band. Like it's the default set on 1, which is low, but you can get some like kind of subtleties in terms of the brightness and color shift. You can see here, this is going from yellow to green to yellow now. And if we move it around, we can see like it kind of moves a bit. It's just a nice little extra bit of stuff going on there. Then again, you've got the lens band offset, which is essentially you can see the band moving here. And then we've got lens band subtract, which is an extra little thing. It essentially subtracts those from it, so you can get some weird effects going on. You can see there. I don't tend to use this one a lot anymore, but it's useful to be there. I want to improve that band stuff for newer releases. It's a little bit raw. Then we've got Lens Ghost Chromatic Separation, which essentially separates. It's basically chromatic aberration for the ghosts. As you can see, when I tick it off, it's a slight shift, and we can increase the shift with the offset here. So if I did 8, you can see now it's really kind of separating. But yeah, that adds a nice little bit of flair to get these fringes on the ghosts. And we've got the color desaturation. So basically, as you can see, each ghost has different color, random color. So the desaturation, we can bring everything together, similar color, or if you lower it even further, you get even more interesting colors. Well, they're more vibrant. But I like to have that on 0.2. And then lastly, here we have in the normal scalar settings, we've got Lens Ghost Threshold, which is again similar to what the Halo threshold does. It's just the threshold of brightness that gets used in the flares. If we bring it right down, you might not see it in this one, but essentially like areas like this would apply to the ghosts. So as you can see, these are a bit more intense than what you might usually have them, but this is just for demonstration effect. Definitely looks quite cool. You're getting some of the halo effects there, you're getting the ghosts, and you're getting like your glints. So I mean, this I think is a good amount of stuff for a first release. A lot of people have expressed interest, and I hope you enjoyed the pretty standard kind of overview of this asset. The other option down here, the last one you've got, is under animation. You've got update on tick, which is just if you want to keyframe the blueprint. Like obviously you can just drag it into the sequencer and add which values you want to key, and it will work. So that's super great. As you can see, got some nice flares going on here. So hope you all enjoyed, and it's up on the marketplace now. Available to purchase. It is a post-process effect, so there's a few things to note. Obviously, it doesn't work. It might not work with other post-process based effects on the marketplace. For instance, I know it has some issues with screen space fog scattering, the really cool plugin, unfortunately. Hopefully, we can address that in the future. I'm not sure what's going on there. But yeah, hope you enjoy. I'll see you all next time.